You're watching Beyond 100 Days. Donald Trump called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. He called him honourable, and now he's calling it all off.
The American president cancels next month's summit with the North Korean leader as the diplomatic rollercoaster continues.
Donald Trump fires off this letter to Pyongyang saying America's nuclear arsenal is so powerful, he's praying to God he doesn't have to use it. Earlier, North Korea claimed it had destroyed part of its nuclear test site. Donald Trump says Pyongyang needs to go much further. We have this story covered with reaction from Washington and from Seoul.
Also on the programme, the missile that downed Malaysian airliner MH17 belonged to a Russian unit, say Dutch prosecutors, and was transported to Ukraine from the Russian city of Kursk.
Well, it's very important, I think, Prime Minister, that we don't have a new Cold War.
The British Foreign Secretary speaks on the phone to the new Armenian Prime Minister for 18 minutes. Only it wasn't the Armenian Prime Minister. So who was it? Get in touch with us. The hashtag Beyond 100 Days.
I'm Catty Ken, New York. Christian Fraser is in London. The Nobel Peace Prize will have to wait. The June nuclear summit is off. The letter that President Trump addressed personally to Kim Jong-un is a curious mixture of flattery and menace.
Yes, in the space of just a few lines, Mr. Trump said that someday he looks forward to meeting Mr. Kim, an offer he reiterated in the last couple of hours. But in his letter, he also warns that America's nuclear capability is so massive, so powerful, I pray to God, he wrote, we never have to use them. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
This is CNN Breaking News.
For once, the breaking news strap really was worth the whoops and flashes. The historic would it, wouldn't it happen Singapore summit had hit the buffers, as many doubters had predicted. Donald Trump's extraordinary letter to Kim Jong-un, the expression of it. In it he wrote, sadly, based on the tremendous anger and open hostility displayed in your most recent statement, I feel it's inappropriate at this time to have this long-planned meeting. His letter also spoke about the power of the US nuclear arsenal and that the meeting was Kim's idea, not his. At the White House a short time ago, a somber President Trump had this to say.
Based on the recent statement of North Korea, I have decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th. While many things can happen and a great opportunity lies ahead potentially, I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world. Hopefully positive things will be taking place with respect to the future of North Korea. But if they don't, we are more ready than we have ever been before.
The legwork for it was being done by the President's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. There were gasps around the world when it emerged he'd travelled to Pyongyang in total secrecy to meet the North Korean leader. Today, Mr. Pompeo was giving evidence to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and sought to explain what had changed the President's mind.
Over the past many days, we have endeavored to do what Chairman Kim and I had agreed, was to put preparation teams together to begin to work to prepare for the summit, and we had received no response to our inquiries from them.
The release of the President's letter coincided unerringly with the North Koreans playing host to a group of Western journalists invited to witness the destruction of a nuclear test site. But there was fury in Washington when Pyongyang put out a statement last night describing the Vice President, Mike Pence, as ignorant and stupid, and there seemed to be a threat. We can also make the US taste an appalling tragedy it's neither experienced nor even imagined up to now. At the heart of this is the demand for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, a phrase that sounds simple but is open to vastly different interpretations. This might have been a historic summit in seeing these two leaders sit down at a table together. But as time went on, it became increasingly clear that's all it would be. Great expectations have been replaced by a cold dose of reality.
Well, in a moment, we'll be live in Seoul with BBC's Laura Bicker. First, though, let's go to our North America editor, John Sopel, who is in Washington. John, let's zoom out to 30,000 feet and ask the big question. Is the world safer or less safe because of the action that Donald Trump took today by calling off this nuclear summit?
Well, I suspect the world will feel a little less safe as a result of it. I mean, there were the micro issues, which were the insults and, whether there was a threat contained in the statement from North Korea last night. But if you're looking at 30,000 feet, the big issue was denuclearization. Would it happen? And as time went on, it became clear that what the Americans saw as being necessary and what the North Koreans were prepared to give were two slightly different things. It was clear the Americans had a model in mind, which was Libya, and not surprisingly, the North Koreans weren't ever so keen on that, given what happened to Colonel Gaddafi. And above all that, I think what has happened, Catty, is that you had a president of the United States who was determined to have a summit with Kim Jong-un and to try to kind of do a deal face to face. I can do something here, without having thought through what the difficult policy issues would be, how easy it would be to get movement, and what a final settlement might look like. And I think as the day became closer to June the 12th, when this summit would actually happen, as a lot of doubters had said, well, those doubts increased and it became kind of more expedient to cancel it than to have a failed summit.
And we got a flavour of that on Tuesday, Laura, but it's still a huge blow to the South Koreans and specifically to President Moon Jae-in because he's invested so much time in it. In fact, one of his advisors was telling us on Tuesday he thought it was 99% sure to go ahead.
Well, he's just back from Washington. He thought he'd put the Singapore summit back on track, and now he's convened an emergency meeting of his cabinet. He's come out with a statement urging Kim Jong-un and President Trump to talk directly to one another to try to resolve their differences. But it does seem that things are way off track now, way off what he'd hoped for. Now remember, he saw the potential in Kim Jong-un's New Year speech, the idea that Kim Jong-un was willing to engage with South Korea. He deftly and diplomatically tried to urge North Korea out from its borders into the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. They marched together under one united flag. That continued this flurry of diplomacy between the two sides. But recently it's soured. The harsh rhetoric hasn't just been aimed at the United States, it's also been aimed here at South Korea. But South Korea has responded quietly. It's just kind of kept under the radar, saying it will continue to work with the North. It is working towards the Singapore summit. But there was huge optimism here. From the North's point of view, they will say, look, we've made all the concessions, we have tried. They've just blown up their nuclear test site. In their view, that is still to be assessed. They handed back the 3 US detainees. They signed a declaration alongside President Moon. They've also restored relations with China. But they have hung on to those nuclear weapons. And when John mentions the issues with regards to denuclearization, they have no intention of handing over all their weapons and then perhaps getting economic aid somewhere along the line.
OK, let me put out something that a South Korea and North Korea watcher at MIT put out this morning. He said the upshot of all of this is that the North Koreans have won because they keep their nukes, as you were just saying. They broke maximum pressure by peeling China off, and they damaged US-South Korean unity. John, does that sound like a fair assessment of how the last couple of months have panned out?
Well, perception is reality in this town, as you well know, Catty, and Donald Trump will be spinning this, that this was him being tough. This was him showing that he wasn't just going to go to it for an unacceptable deal. And because North Korea couldn't meet his conditions, although we never quite understood what his conditions were, he has called off the summit from a position of strength with a bit of kind of breastbeating at the same time, talking about the power of the US nuclear arsenal. So I don't think that the Donald Trump would accept that analysis, as you might expect. I think the problem is that I think it's difficult to put it back on track now. Now, Donald Trump clearly hoped that it would happen. He clearly invested quite a lot of political capital in it happening, but he came to a point where he thought, I've got to pull the plug on it. Now, I'm sure in his mind he thinks it will be quite easy to put it back on the tracks. I think it's going to be much, much more difficult than that.
What we don't know, Laura, of course, is what is going on inside North Korea, because there's no question there's been a hardening of the rhetoric in the last 2 weeks. We get a statement from the Vice Foreign Minister, this woman Ko Son-hui, who we've not seen much of before, but apparently she's a rising star. So do we think that Kim Jong-un still has total control in North Korea?
Yes, she is one of Kim Jong-un's closest aides. She is fluent English speaker. She is fluent in American culture and American politics. She's very well connected. So when she speaks, she's probably speaking with Chairman Kim's blessing. I thought it was notable that when she did speak, and when the other foreign minister last week aimed his rhetoric at John Bolton, it's notable that it's John Bolton and Vice President Mike Pence, despite the fact that Donald Trump himself also referred to the Libya model. Maybe not aiming it at Donald Trump was a way of trying to keep the door open for the summit, just aiming it at his aides instead. If so, well, they've wildly miscalculated. But when it comes back to the point with regards to North Korea walking away with everything with this, they have stepped onto the global stage. They had announced the summit to its people, which many had not thought they would do. They have announced to the people that they are willing to denuclearize. Again, something that we thought we'd never see. They now need to announce to the North Korean people, America's not going to meet with us. Here in the South, they're going to wake up in a few hours and discover that the summit is off, and with it, their hopes for peace. This is a peninsula that has been divided for nearly 70 years. Every day, I will meet someone whose family or whose mother is still in the north. The day of the summit between Kim Jong-un and President Moon, I met a 16-year-old girl who has defected here. Her mother is still in North Korea. She hasn't seen her mum since 2011. These are the kind of daily issues that people here deal with. They had hope and now they don't. Who do they blame? And that will be the interesting question.
OK, Laura Bicker in Seoul and John Sopel there in Washington. Thank you both very much for your thoughts.
Christian, by the way, Christian, what happens to the coins now?
What happens, more importantly, to my accreditation? I spent half an hour this morning on this very detailed accreditation form that the Singapore government centres. I pressed return at exactly the same time that Donald Trump pressed return on his fax machine, or however he sends these letters to the supreme leader. So all that's off and all my work is for naught. I don't know.
Can I just say one little small thing that I say to my children sometimes?
What's that?
It's not all about you.
Oh, right. All right, then. Go on, then. I'll give you that. Right, let's turn to something else. Mr. Trump is convinced the FBI planted a spy in his 2016